Working at Nordstrom in downtown Chicago, I had my fair share of interesting customer interactions, but none as unsettling as my encounters with Mrs. Robinson. That's not her real name, but it's what we started calling her after the first few incidents. She was in her late 30s, always impeccably dressed, and had a way of making her presence felt the moment she walked into the store. It all started one busy Saturday afternoon. I was reorganizing the men's section when she approached me. "Can you help me pick out a tie for my husband?" she asked, her voice smooth like velvet. I was more than happy to help. It was my job after all. But as I showed her different options, her compliments about my appearance and style became more frequent and increasingly personal. I tried to keep the conversation professional, but she was persistent. She asked about my age, my background, and even my relationship status. I answered vaguely, feeling increasingly uncomfortable, and when she left, I breathed a sigh of relief. Over the next few weeks, Mrs. Robinson became a regular visitor. She always sought me out, asking for assistance with various items, but it was clear her interest was not in shopping. She would always find ways to touch my arm or stand uncomfortably close. I mentioned it to my manager, but he just laughed it off. "She's probably just a lonely housewife," he said. One evening, as I was closing up, I noticed Mrs. Robinson's waiting outside the store. My heart sank. She approached me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I was hoping to catch you," she said. "I need help with one more thing." I was hesitant, but she insisted it would only take a minute, so against my better judgment, I followed her to her car in the parking garage. She opened the trunk to reveal a large box. "Could you help me carry this inside? It's for my husband's birthday." As I reached for the box, she suddenly grabbed my hands. Panic surged through me. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She leaned in close, her perfume overwhelming. "I've been watching you, you know? You're exactly my type. So young, so innocent." I struggled to free my hands, but she was surprisingly strong. "Let me go," I said, my voice firm. She laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Why would I do that? We're just getting to know each other." Just then, a security guard rounded the corner. He saw us and hurried over. "Is everything okay here?" he asked. Mrs. Robinson then released me and stepped back, her demeanor changing instantly. "Yes, everything's fine. My friend was just helping me with the box." I quickly pulled my hands free and stepped away from her. The security guard looked at us suspiciously but didn't press further. I didn't wait around. I thanked him and hurried away, my heart still racing. The next day, I reported the incident to my manager and the mall security. They reviewed the security footage and saw the encounter. Mrs. Robinson was now banned from the store, and I was told she would be escorted out if she ever returned. That experience left me shaken. I had always thought of Nordstrom as a safe and professional environment, but that night showed me that danger could come in many forms. I became more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings, and less trusting of strangers, no matter how harmless they might seem. From then on, every time a customer approached me with a little too much interest, I couldn't help but remember Mrs. Robinson and the night she crossed a line that should have never been crossed. Working late nights at Target in the quiet suburb of Raleigh had always been uneventful, until one winter night, when a seemingly ordinary encounter turned into a disturbing ordeal. It was nearing closing time, and the store was almost empty, the aisles echoing with the faint sound of distant music. I was restocking shelves in the electronics section when she first caught my eye. A woman in her mid-40s, sharply dressed, but with a wild look in her eyes that sent a chill down my spine. She was wandering aimlessly through the aisles, muttering to herself. Feeling a sense of duty, I approached her. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. She stopped and stared at me, her eyes piercing. "You can see me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I was taken back by her question. "Yes, I can see you. Are you okay?" She looked around nervously, then leaned in close. "They're watching me," she hissed. "They're always watching." I didn't know how to respond. I thought maybe she was suffering from some kind of delusion. "Who's watching you?" I asked gently. She glanced over her shoulder, her body tensing. "Never mind, I need to leave." And with that, she hurried away, leaving her shopping cart abandoned. I watched her go, feeling unsettled. I reported the incident to my manager, but he dismissed it as just another odd customer. The store closed, and I began my usual routine of cleaning up. And that's when I heard it. A soft tapping sound coming from the back of the store. Curious, I followed the noise to the storage area. As I pushed open the door, I was met with a sight that stopped me in my tracks. The woman was still there, crouched in the corner, her eyes wide with terror. "You have to hide me," she pleaded. "They're here." I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to help her, but another part screamed that something was very wrong. So I decided to call the police, thinking that they could help her more than I could. But before I made the call, the lights went out, plunging us into darkness. I heard her gasp, and then the sound of footsteps. Someone else was in the store. I grabbed my phone, using it as a flashlight, and that's when I saw them. Two men dressed in black, moving silently through the storage area. They hadn't seen us yet. I grabbed the woman's hand, and we hid behind a stack of boxes. My heart was pounding in my chest as the men searched the room. They were talking in low voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. After what felt like an eternity, they left. I waited a few more minutes before I dared to move. Then I escorted the woman out of the store into the safety of the well-lit parking lot. The police arrived soon after. The woman was hesitant to talk to them, but eventually, she revealed a harrowing story. She was on the run from a dangerous ex-partner who had been stalking her. The men in the store were his associates sent to find her. The police took my statement and her statement and assured her that they would provide protection, and as for me, I was left shaken. My view of the quiet suburban target forever changed. I never saw the woman again, but I often wonder what became of her, hoping she found the safety she desperately sought. Working at LensCrafters in a bustling shopping center in Pennsylvania, I had encountered various types of customers, but none as notorious as Mrs. Edna, the so-called deaf woman who was a well-known figure in her local retail community. Her reputation preceded her, a litigious individual who preyed on businesses by feigning deafness and then suing for discrimination. It was late Thursday evening, less than half an hour before closing, when Mrs. Edna made her entrance. She was an elderly woman, her hair a silvery gray, and she carried herself with an air of self-importance. As she walked in, I felt a sense of dread. I had heard stories about her from other stores in the area. She began by browsing the eyeglasses, but it wasn't long before she started causing a scene. She would deliberately misinterpret the staff's assistants, accusing them of speaking too softly or ignoring her because of her deafness. Her voice grew louder, attracting the attention of other customers. I tried to intervene, offering my help with a polite smile, but Mrs. Edna was relentless. She claimed we were all discriminating against her, threatening to sue. The atmosphere in the store became tense, customers exchanging uneasy glances. As closing time approached, Mrs. Edna showed no signs of leaving. She continued to berate the staff, her accusations growing more outrageous. Finally, I made the decision to close the store early, hoping she would take the hint. I announced to the customers that we were closing in 15 minutes, thanking them for their understanding. Most began to leave, but Mrs. Edna stayed, continuing her tirade. With no other option, I politely asked her to leave, explaining that the store was closing. She responded by sitting down on one of the chairs, refusing to move. "I'm not leaving until I get the service I deserve," she declared. I was at a loss. The other employees looked to me for guidance, but I was just as perplexed. We couldn't physically remove her, and her threats of legal action loomed over us. In the end, I had to call mall security. They arrived and, after a lengthy discussion, managed to convince Mrs. Edna to leave, but not without her vowing to return with a lawsuit. The next day, I arrived early to open the store, still uneasy about the previous night's events. As I was preparing for the day, I saw Mrs. Edna outside, waiting. My heart sank. As the opening time approached, I unlocked the doors, keeping an eye on her. She immediately stormed in, demanding to speak to the manager. I informed her that I was in charge, and she began her accusations once again. This time, however, I was prepared. I had contacted our corporate office about her, explaining the situation. They had advised me to call the police if she caused any more disturbances. As her voice grew louder, disrupting the store's peace once again, I made the call. The police arrived quickly, and after a brief conversation with Mrs. Edna, they escorted her out. She was furious, shouting about discrimination and lawsuits. Later that day, I received a call from our corporate office. They had issued a formal ban against Mrs. Edna, prohibiting her from entering any of her stores nationwide. They commended me for my handling of the situation and assured me that they will handle any legal repercussions. The incident with Mrs. Edna became a cautionary tale among local businesses. It was a reminder that sometimes people use their vulnerabilities as weapons, exploiting empathy and kindness for that personal gain. From then on, I approached my job with a new level of vigilance, aware that not every customer's intentions are genuine. The memory of Mrs. Edna's deceptive silence and her manipulative tactics stayed with me, a reminder of the complexities and challenges of working in retail.